I explain this to people sometimes too, that, yes, this might be expensive, this table that I'm selling you, but you're going to have this table forever, and you're going to give this table to your kids and to their grandkids. This isn't something that you're going to throw away. This is something that will retain its value. And if it brings happiness to you and it brings beauty to your life, why wouldn't you want to have it? My name's Evan Snyderman. I co-founded our company with a friend, Zesty Meyers, in 1997. I was an artist before I started the gallery, and I started blowing glass when I was about 13 years old. And through my early years as a glass artist, I met my business partner, and we started we used to do performance art with hot glass. We had a nonprofit called the B Team, and we traveled around the country and around the world doing performances with glass, which led us to New York in the early 90s. I grew up in Philadelphia and grew up in the craft world, in fact. My parents had a gallery in Philadelphia called the Snyderman Works Gallery, which they ran for over 50 years. So I grew up in an environment with artists, living with artists, visiting artists, traveling to artist studios. And in fact, we lived above the gallery for the first 16 years of my life. So now as I've grown, I've started to, remember things as a kid that influenced my later life. I used to do the window displays in my parents' gallery when I was like 10 years old. So this has been in my blood my entire life. But I moved to New York in the 90s to become an artist, and I was teaching glass blowing at a school in Brooklyn called Urban Glass. And like many artists, I was broke, and I always collected things my whole life, starting with Matchbox cars to pocket knives. So when I moved to New York, I had accumulated a lot of things. I had a big loft in Philadelphia. And when you have a lot of things, you eventually have to sell things. So that's probably the story of many dealers. But I started selling things at a local flea market, starting at 11th and A. I had a friend at the time who was selling vintage clothing, and she said, why don't you set up a table with me one weekend, which I did. Shortly thereafter, Zesty had some things he wanted to sell, so we took a table together. And a couple of weekends in the summer in the East Village, we realized, wow, this was kind of a fun thing to do. We made a little bit of money. So we decided to do an experiment. We each took $100 from the money we had made from the weekend and went back to our old haunts, I went back to Philadelphia, he went back to Rhode Island, to the thrift stores and junk shops that we used to go to or whatnot. At that time, you could also find things literally in the trash, which I still do from time to time. But took the $100, bought whatever we could buy, brought it back to the flea market the next weekend, and that $100 turned into $300. And that's how it sort of started. We realized this could become a sort of business. It was, of course, at that time more of a hobby. But eventually, we started to do this regularly. We started to do estate sales. We were asked or invited to do the 26th Street Flea Market, which was at that time, this is about 1994, 95. That was a pretty big deal. The 26th Street Flea Market, for those of you that don't know, in New York, was the epicenter of culture in New York. And you would have to show up at 5 in the morning. There would be everything from people still partying from the night before to rock stars and celebrities. And it was like the best of New York you could ever imagine. We would show up in our van in the dark with flashlights. People would buy half our truck before we even unloaded. We just had an eye for things. And I think that's what we early on realized. We could do things different than everyone else. Partly because we were a little bit younger than most of the other people. We didn't follow the rules. We went out and did things our own way. So we would go jump in our van, sleep in our van, drive some faraway place to stay overnight to be the first ones to get into the estate sale. And we were buying whatever books we could find and spending all night reading about what was, to learn. We educated ourselves, didn't study design, didn't learn in school any of these people's names, but we asked a lot of questions. And that's what helped us learn, and we really cut our teeth at the 26th Street Flea Market. Eventually, we needed a space to store all this stuff that we were buying, and we rented a small space in Brooklyn, which turned into a shop. In 1997, we opened R & Company in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, on the corner of South First and Wythe Avenue, way before Williamsburg was cool. There were still wild dogs and prostitutes on our corner, and it was like a whole different scene. But we were still doing the flea market, and eventually we found our way to Tribeca in 2000. We opened in Tribeca, and Tribeca has now become one of the epicenters of the contemporary art world. We've been here now for 25 years, so it's exciting. One of the things that we have always done as a gallery is looked for partners, looked for ways to collaborate. I think we have thought about this business as something bigger than ourselves. So it's never been about us or about our personal tastes necessarily, but more about the big picture, more about how we can grow this industry. And we really, even from the very beginning, when we had no idea what we were doing, we had that vision. And I think that comes from maybe our background from being artists or being in art school and being performers. We wanted to kind of tell stories. We wanted to find the things that were unknown. Discovery was always a big part of our program and still is. But so we've looked for partners, we've looked for people to help us along the way, whether they're other artists or collaborating with other galleries, inviting people in to help grow and make this business bigger than it was. Is collectible design meant to be used or preserved? Obviously, it's meant to be used. The design world is quite unique, and I think part of what we talk about a lot is that it's still relatively unresolved in many ways. Like the collectible design market is still very new. It's still developing. It's still not totally defined. Even the terminology collectible design, I still have issues with. There's not like a better term for it. We still are trying to define ourselves. When I say it's new, obviously people have always bought and designed things. But the idea of having a piece of furniture that could also be valuable or hold its value or even go up in value or become part of your quote unquote collection versus just something that you sit on is a relatively new concept. That's something that we have spent the last 20 years trying to really create, that idea of owning something that has value, whether it's just personal or monetary. That's less important. But that is something that is still being discussed on a regular basis. But ultimately, design is meant to be used, and not all the things we sell or we focus on are functional. We tend to look for artists that sort of cross boundaries between contemporary art, craft, and design. That's our sweet spot. That's what we really focus on, things that are handmade, things that are unique, things that have a story to them. But ultimately, they are meant to be lived with and not put on a sort of pedestal. And one of the things I always say to students when I talk to students or young collectors is the only real difference that I see between art and design is that art is meant to be looked at, whereas design is meant to be touched. We like to have fun in what we do. Otherwise, why are we doing it? Hopefully. It's not always fun. There's definitely we've been through some hard times. But there was a moment when we first started actually working with these young artists called the Haas Brothers, when we showed them for the first time at a fair in San Francisco, and they were just starting to do these beast furniture pieces, which were these large, sort of amorphic, furry animals that were chairs or benches. One was a dromedary, which was like this double hump chair. Really, like no one had ever seen anything like it before. And beyond the fact that they were making these sort of funny, weird, exciting furniture pieces, they had these bronze claw feet and things like that, but they also were actually adding genitalia to some of them. And there was this very, very conservative, older collector, whose name I won't say, but very famous contemporary art collector in the San Francisco area, who came into our booth in her 80s, I believe, at the time. And Nikki, who, one of the Haas brothers, was there. We introduced him to her because we had known her. And he's talking to her, and she really loved his chair. And he just, says, oh, and it has balls. And she reaches down and grabs this chair's balls. And like her whole face lit up. She was so excited. And I was like sweating. I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. This is gonna be terrible. And that was it. Like, I knew we had done something right. And it was just hilarious. Everybody was laughing. And that really like kind of catapulted them and a lot of this like idea of how we worked with them at the time. One of the projects that we are really excited about is called Objects USA. It's something that started for us almost 20 years ago, the idea of wanting to revisit this very important exhibition that took place in 1970, that was originally organized by the Smithsonian Institute and opened in DC and traveled to 35 museums around the country, and then to Scandinavia and ultimately Japan. It was the first survey of contemporary craft in America. That show, curated by Paul Smith, who was the then curator at the American Craft Museum, now Mad Museum, and an art dealer named Lee Nordness. They organized this exhibition together with the funding and the backing of the Johnson & Wax Company, who ended up buying all the objects in the show and donating them to several institutions. But that exhibition, which started in '69, the book was published in '70, really created what we know of as the American craft movement, which is something that I grew up in and also ultimately have now come to try to support. But in that exhibition were almost 300 artists. There were some of the most famous artists of the era who have now gone on to become iconic names like Sheila Hicks, Ruth Asawa, Peter Volkis, Ron Nagel, major people in the field of ceramics, textiles, glass, Dale Chihuly, Wendell Castle, Wharton Eschrick, you name it, they were in that show. So for the 50th anniversary, which was to be 2020, we had decided several years earlier that we wanted to sort of celebrate that moment and recreate the Objects USA exhibition. With the intent of it ultimately becoming a triennale. And in the design world, there are no design sort of biennales or triennales in the field of collectible design. So we wanted to sort of create one with Objects USA being its inspiration. So in 2020, we opened the first Objects USA, which was a celebration of the 50th anniversary, where we spent several years collecting 50 works from artists from that original exhibition and paired them with 50 contemporary artists to show how it had come full circle. Because in the late 60s, there wasn't a big difference between contemporary art and craft. But over the last 50 years, this hierarchy has been created between art and design. Our goal was to break that hierarchy down. And that's actually happening, which is so exciting. So that show then created the first Objects USA Revisit, and now in 2024, we just launched the second iteration of Objects USA, which was all contemporary, with 2 young curators. So the idea is that it's also giving an opportunity for young artists to show their work and get a bigger audience. At the same time, we're supporting young curators, and we publish a book for each iteration of the exhibition. So we've published 2 books so far. And now we're just starting to work on Objects USA 2027. So it's a really exciting project. It's a much bigger project than we ever imagined we could take on. It's a lot of logistics, as you could imagine. But it's a really fun project, and hopefully it will live on for many, many years to come. I mean, obviously, I think that when it comes to collecting, I always encourage people to collect with their gut, to buy the things they love. There's not so much advising in the design world, so you don't have people telling you what to buy. You have interior designers who are designing homes, and some of them do have enough knowledge to recommend certain important artists to their clients, which I love that, and we work a lot with those designers, and that's really, really important because that keeps this business growing. But for young collectors, I really encourage them to buy what they love. And there's so much opportunity in the design sphere to buy great work for very low money compared to buying into the art world. I mean, there's also young artists that you can buy as well. But there's a lot more room for growth in the design world because I really believe that it's really just beginning to be understood as being collectible. You know, art has been collected for, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years. The idea of collecting design is maybe 25 years old. There's always been design manufactured. Obviously, people bought great design throughout history, but they didn't consider it part of their collection. They considered it part of their, you know, furnishings. So this is still a great opportunity because things that are, you know, the most important design objects in the world today, you can still buy for a fraction of the price of what you could buy a mediocre piece of art. So it's really a great chance to buy into things. The sphere needs to continue to grow. It needs to regenerate. And what we see is it's a generational thing. A lot of our clients who might be in their 60s and 70s, a lot of their kids are just starting to collect, just starting to buy. So a lot of this does get handed down through generations, the idea of collecting. But we hope that there's a much broader audience, and obviously the digital media and the internet has opened a huge, you know, amount of opportunity to a much wider audience. But it hasn't translated yet into really people buying things. I think there's a lot of people, you know, being exposed. So there's a lot more work to do to get people to understand the value of the objects they live with. What's beautiful about the things we sell are that we hope that the people that buy things from us, these are not temporary objects. And I explain this to people sometimes too, that, you know, yes, this might be expensive, this table that I'm selling you, but you're gonna have this table forever, and you're gonna give this table to your kids and to their grandkids. This isn't something that you're gonna throw away. This is something that will retain its value. And if it brings happiness to you, and it brings beauty to your life, why wouldn't you wanna have it?
Auction or estate sales?
Estate sales.
Coffee table book you'd recommend to every collector?
Objects USA, the original catalog from 1970. You'll learn a lot.
The one city you think defines design history the most?
That's a tough one. It depends on the era. You know, you can start with Vienna for Wiener Werkstatt. You could go to, you know, LA for modernism.
Okay. If your gallery had a soundtrack, what would that playlist be right now, or that song be right now?
Punk rock. Hardcore, with a little bit of 90s hip hop.